Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name's Kenny. I'm the curator at the Cleo Red Fisher Museum. Tonight is the finale of our virtual speaker series. So thank you for joining us, and we hope you've enjoyed all the presentations we've had. Tonight, we have Amy Cohen joining us. She's the curator of the exhibit Tattooed and Tenacious, Inked Women in California's History. She's also the executive director of the nonprofit organization Exhibit Envoy, which creates and travels exhibits for small museums, libraries, and cultural centers across the U.S. Amy has her bachelor's in history from the College of Worcester and master's in museum studies from JFK University. She's joining us live tonight from Oakland, California, so please welcome Amy.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks, Kenny, for that introduction.
Yep, thanks for joining us. Also, I just want to let everyone know there will be a live Q&A following the presentation tonight. So you can actually ask Amy questions by commenting on either Facebook or YouTube. Just comment right on the video and we'll see those. You can comment during the presentation and then we'll just read them back to Amy at the end. So feel free to ask any questions you might have. And with that, I'll let Amy get started.
Perfect. So thanks again, everyone, for being here today. Like Kenny said, my name is Amy Cohen. And today we're going to be talking all about inked women before World War II in the American West, but particularly in California, as that's what the exhibit that I curated is all about, Tattooed and Tenacious, Inked Women in California's History. As you can see, I have tattoos myself. This was, of course, not always the case. I do have a tattoo inspired by this show, which I'll tell you about later. But let's jump right in. So how did this project get started? I was getting my master's degree. And, you know, everybody has to write a thesis for their master's. And if you know the College of Worcester, you know you have to write a thesis for your undergraduate degree as well. As Kenny knows, we went to school together. And I kept thinking that I did not want to just write a paper that no one was going to read ever again. So I kept thinking, you know, it's a museum studies program. What can I do? What can I do? So I thought, well, let's do an exhibit. Maybe 5 or 10 people will see it. Maybe it'll be worth it that way. So I started thinking about what kind of topic I wanted to research. And I was like, well, let's do tattoos. I haven't seen tattoo exhibits yet. And now they're everywhere. I don't know if you've seen at the Field Museum, everywhere internationally, there are all these tattoo exhibits. But that wasn't really the case back when this started in 2015. So I was thinking, let's do tattoos. And that is a huge topic. And then I was thinking, okay, well, how about women in tattoos? Still a huge topic. Women in tattoos in California. Still a huge topic, especially now. And so I thought, okay, let's do women in tattoos in California before World War II. Since I was a history major, it tied it all together. And that's how it all began. The exhibit has been to a few different places. And along the way, I've been really lucky to get to talk to people who are kind of icons in the tattoo community. So this is me at the first installation, and then you can see in the center of the screen here, Lyle Tuttle. Lyle is a really big name in the tattoo world. He passed away recently, but I got to spend a lot of hours drinking with him and talking about women who were tattooers, talking about women who had tattoos, talking about the women he tattooed. So I was really lucky to get to do that. So you'll hear some stories from Lyle in this exhibit. I also talked to Madame Chinchilla and a lot of other female tattoo artists in California, and in particular in the Bay Area. So it's a really great way to get to know the tattoo community a little bit more. So let's jump in. So today, more women than men actually have tattoos. So almost a quarter of American women have permanent ink compared to just 19% of men. And younger people, of course, are even more likely to be tattooed, as more than a third of Americans between the ages of 18 and 40 have skin art. But what about the first women to get tattooed? Well, of course, we have to, out here in California, recognize that Native women were the first women to get tattoos. And Native women were the first ones to also give tattoos out here in the Golden State. What I really love about this is that a lot of the tribes in California had a similar tattooing tradition, and female elders were the ones who really held that knowledge. So women would get tattooed as part of a puberty ritual. to pass into the afterlife or to recognize other people in the afterlife, or even just for purely aesthetic reasons, like the same reasons that I got mine. So you can see here, it's a little bit tough to see on some of these photographs, but if you see, you can look and see some faint lines right here on her chin, 3 ones that go right across here. And chin tattoos were by far the most common kind of tattooing tradition for women in tribes in California. So you can see here a few of those different examples. And again, lots and lots of chin tattoos. You could recognize what tribe somebody belonged to just by seeing what chin tattoo they had. And there were some traditions that did include body tattooing as well, but chins were by far the most common. And this practice was almost entirely wiped out by the US government. But modern day Native women are reclaiming the practice, which I love. So you can see this throughout California. You can see this in Canada. You can see this all along the West Coast. I am sure you can see it in Ohio as well. And I love that those women are also not just reviving the tattoo traditions and getting the same designs, but they're also reviving the tattooing practices as well. So I just want to make a note of that, you know, we're talking about history, but this is still going on today. So one of the reasons sometimes tattoos can be hard to see, especially on people with darker skin, is that the kind of photography that was done in the past didn't record it very well. So these first, these 311s here, it's hard to see, right? And so Michael Bradley, who is a New Zealand photographer, I believe, decided to explore this topic. And so you can see he worked with Maori people who have tattoos. The right-hand image is a digital image of what they actually look like. And then Michael Bradley used wet plate collodion photography to take their same photograph. You could see that the mix of chemicals that he used made kind of green and blue shades less likely to appear. So it always makes me wonder, how many older photos we've seen where that person could have been totally tattooed, but those cultural markers are just now lost to history. I think this is also one reason why this presentation is going to focus so much on white people with tattoos, because the photographs that we have for them really reflect the tattoos that are on their skin. And with that, I'll take you into the first known white woman to get tattooed in America. She was her name is Olive Oatman, of course. She was part of a Mormon sect called the Brewsterites, and she moved from Illinois to Bashan in Arizona in the 1850s. On the way, though, her family disagreed with the leaders of the sect, and so her family split off, no longer going to Arizona, but instead heading towards California. On the way there, Olive, who was 14 at the time, and her family, her mom, her dad, and her 9 siblings were attacked by a Yavapai tribe. Her mom, dad, and 7 of her siblings were killed. 1 was left for dead, but eventually was found and recovered, and her sister was taken with her. So after some time with the Yavapai tribe, where Olive was not treated very well, she was treated basically like a slave. She was traded to a local Mojave tribe, and that's where she got these tattoos. Both she and her sister Marianne had the chin tattoos done, as well as tattoos on her arms, although I've actually never seen pictures of what's on her arms. But she fell in love with the Mojave, and they fell in love with her. You can see that these chin tattoos, if you look closely, they're pretty straight lines. There was some back and forth, did Olive want these tattoos? Were they given to her against her will? And I think looking how straight those lines are, you couldn't have been fighting that for the lines to be straight like that. Unfortunately, Olive's story is not a very happy one. After she was with the Mojave, she spent a few years there. She did well. Some people say she may have married and had children. Not totally sure. But then she was found by some white soldiers and forced to return to white society. And she did not want to go back. She was depressed. She never felt like she fit back in society. She uh, toured around the country talking about her chins, making up stories as they go, but she just never really seemed comfortable, and she just didn't have the best life after that. Um, so as I said, there's disputed reasons behind her tattoos. She may have asked for them. They may have been given to her because the Mojave accepted her as one of them, or it may have been done against her will. But I do want to share a quote from a tribal elder, Llewellyn Barrickman, before we move on. And so he believed that Olive, like most Mojave females, chose to be tattooed because the tribe never forced tattoos on anyone. Indeed, some Mojaves resisted chin tattoos until they got older, and then they were either persuaded or chose to get them for fear that they would be held back in the afterlife without them. So after Olive went on her whirlwind tour, and there is a good book about her if you want to read it. Just Google Olive Oatman book. It'll be the first one that comes up. We kind of turn to these society women. So in 1897, New York World quote said that 75% of American society women had tattoos. I totally do not believe that number. There is no way that 75% of these women had tattoos. However, for a newspaper to publish that, to me, indicates that a lot of well-off women had tattoos. Of course, you would never be able to tell. I have these pictures here because you can see with the clothing, the high neck, the long sleeve, the long hem, any part of that woman's body could be tattooed. And unless it was on her hands or her face, you would have no idea. So again, some of this is hearsay. There's not a ton of photographic evidence because most society women did not want pictures floating around of A, skin that they usually covered up, but B, something private and intimate like a tattoo. So American elites took their cues from across the Atlantic during this time period, their European counterparts. In Europe, the list of crown heads who had their bodies illustrated in the 1880s and 1890s is super extensive. And these noblemen and noblewomen's tattoos were actually often done in Asia or Asian inspired and featured really elaborate designs. This woman on the right here is Lady Randolph Churchill, Winston Churchill's mom. And even she was rumored to have a snake design on her wrist, which she apparently covered with big, chunky bracelets at the parties that she went to. There's no photograph of Lady Randolph with a tattoo, like I mentioned, but I would love to introduce you to someone who was a society woman back in her day here in America, who loved getting photographs with her tattoos. And her name is Princess Aimee Isabella Crocker Ash Gillig Gorod Miskinov Galitzine. So if you can't tell from that, yes, she had 5 husbands, including royalty. Amy Crocker, she changed her name from Amy, A-M-Y, my name, to Aimee, the more exotic French version, just because it sounded better, was the heiress to the Crocker Railroad Empire, which is a really big name out here in California, and you may know it in Ohio as well. They have lots of art museums, lots of money around here. And she grew up in Sacramento, California. In 1875, when she was just 10 years old, her father passed away and left her a fortune of $10 million, which is over $200 million today. So she pretty much did whatever she wanted and did not care what anybody else had to say about her. She had 5 husbands, like I said, including 2 Russian princes who were each 20 years her junior. She had 5 kids. She spent 10 years in Asia, where she got most of her tattoos. You can see here on her arm, she has some intertwining snakes, as well as the initials of her one true love, her 3rd husband, Jackson Gerard. She also had a snake on her leg. On her back, she had a butterfly. She was a wild woman. She threw lavish parties. She went to every first night of a Broadway play and traveled across the world. She also wrote a book, which is not very politically correct, but is surprisingly open-minded for the time when she was writing it. And I think that title of her autobiography kind of sums up her approach to life, which is, and I do it again. I just love her, if you can't tell. After society women, though, kind of had their fun with tattoos, that's when working class women really came to the forefront as tattooed ladies in circus sideshows. So you can see this picture here is from an Indiana Historical Society sideshow. And I know that it has the tattooed lady on there somewhere. I'm not seeing it on my small screen, but I will let you search that out. But essentially, sideshows traveled along with circuses, and it was another way for circuses to make money. They had freaks who participated in these sideshows. Some of the freaks were made, like tattooed ladies. They chose to get tattooed and be part of this. Others were people with birth defects or other deformities who made a living out of showing off their bodies and having people gawk at them. But these sideshows were really where tattoos became popular with the American public and in the American imagination. And I just wanted to show this particular banner right here because you can see that alive button in the bottom. That was so when you saw these sideshow banners advertising what you would see in the circus, you would know that the person you were seeing was actually alive and not dead and stuffed, because sideshows did travel stuffed people. All right, let's leave it on this sideshow for now. So there were a few reasons that women would join a circus sideshow. You could travel around the world, or the US, some did travel around the world. You could make money. You could live independently, and especially at a time when there were very few choices for women who wanted to work outside of the home and who didn't want to raise a family. This was an escape, and this was a very fun escape, actually, because you got to travel and be around a lot of like-minded people. And the money aspects was really cool too. So in the 1890s, working class families lived on $300 to $500 a year or so. However, a tattooed lady could make $100 to $200 a week, although of course that's in season. Many tattooed ladies took jobs in the off season, which we'll talk about later, including tattooing. But I gotta say, that kind of money would be hard to pass up if you also got to be independent and travel. So there were two kind of real eras of tattooed ladies. The first and the earliest was starting around the 1880s, moving into the 1890s, and then into the 1900s enough, that decade, the 1900s. And two of the first performers were Nora Hildebrandt, who's on the left, and Irene Woodward on the right. And so, of course, these women got tattooed for the reasons we just talked about. They wanted to find adventure, they wanted to be independent, they wanted to travel, and they wanted to make money and earn their own living. But that didn't sell circus sideshow tickets. So instead, these ladies and the carnival barkers had to tell stories to rationalize why they had tattoos. So I'm going to share a few of those stories now. Just remember, these stories are totally false. They have been disproven over and over again. We know the real stories, but it helped to justify why people should buy a ticket and come see these freaks. The first era, like I said, the 1880s to 1900s, most of these women told captivity narratives. So this kind of reflects what was happening in American society at the same time. So a lot of these stories are that Native peoples kidnapped them or were threatening these women. These Native people, especially Native men, had control over the woman's body. It was all about the American West and this idea, of this wild, wild West. And that's what the public wanted to hear about, was the Wild West and how these women fit into it. So I'll tell you stories about Nora and Irene here. And just a side note, this is a little odd, so apologies in advance if it's too much. But in this kind of like Victorian coded language, tattooing didn't always just mean tattooing in these stories. It also meant sex. So if you hear about forced tattooing, people listening to these stories in that time would hear rape. If you heard tattooing by a father, you would also hear incest. So if you substitute that kind of coded language into any of these stories, I mean, not only are these women showing you their whole bodies, they're also telling you a super, super scandalous story at the same time for why they have these tattoos. So Nora here on the left was tattooed by her father, there you go, under the threat of death by Sitting Bull. Nora's father, Martin, and she were captured by Sitting Bull, and Martin was told to tattoo members of the tribe. When a warrior accused Martin of poisoning him, Sitting Bull said he would give them liberty only if Martin tattooed his daughter Nora from her toes to her head. She was tied to a tree where Martin began to work for 6 hours a day for a whole year until they were rescued. So that's the story you would hear. That's the story that would be printed in newspapers. That's the story the barker would be shouting out from the sideshow. In reality, Martin Hildebrandt was Nora's husband. They lived in New York City, had never been to the American West, and Martin was one of the first tattoo artists in the United States. Of course, they had to use the name Sitting Bull, who was close to a celebrity at that time, to provoke fear and awe. And then Irene has a much shorter story here. But she, again, was tattooed by her father to prevent her from being kidnapped when she was growing up in the Wild West. This is a direct quote from her story, talking about the tattooing, that in spite of the pain, the girl was delighted and coaxed her father to continue. Of course, the story also goes she was captured, but her tattoos frightened people. And so then the native people let her go free. Of course, none of that's true. She also just got her tattoo to make a living. Our next era of tattooed ladies, which is about the 1910s to the 1930s, although there were tattooed ladies beyond that, told totally different stories. So these stories are all about getting tattooed for love and for independence. So here is Artoria Gibbons. Her story was that she ran away with a carnival tattoo artist to be his muse at age 14. Others talk about getting tattooed to impress a lover. One woman, Jean Carroll, was apparently a bearded lady whose boyfriend couldn't bear to kiss her. So she shaved her beard and got tattooed and got married so they could stay in the circus together. Again, in reality, the stories are the same as the previous era. And even with Artoria, who you see here, she got tattooed by her husband, Red, who's also a famous tattoo artist, during hard times so that they could work and travel as a team on the circus sideshow circuit. And something I want to point out as we're going through, especially this kind of second era of tattooed ladies, is keep an eye on the outfits that they choose to be photographed in. You can see that they really choose outfits that reflect femininity and beauty, which I think, and which some actually made statements about, is a sign that tattooed women were beautiful as well. Lady Viola also told a story about why she got tattooed. Her story was that she would train to be a nurse, and if she completed her degree, then she could get tattoos and her dad would pay for them. No one wanted to hear that she got tattooed to make a living because that's exactly what happens. But in real life, Lady Viola was Ethel Martin. She lived and tattooed in Fresno out here for many years and even came out of retirement at age 73 to perform in more circus sideshows. And she claimed to be the oldest tattooed lady to ever perform. This is one of my favorite tattooed ladies, Betty Broadbent. And this is also one of Lyle Tuttle's favorite tattooed ladies. He said his crush on Betty Broadbent growing up is what made him like brunettes, which is, I always think, a cute story. She started working for the Ringling Brothers in 1927. She had about 350 tattoos, and she also worked the circus sideshow circuit for years through the 1960s. But what I love most is you can see here in this picture, she seems to be standing on a stage of some kind. She actually competed in a beauty pageant at the 1939 New York World's Fair. And this was the World's Fair where RCA first introduced television to the American public. So this was actually broadcast, her competing. She did not win. She definitely did not win. But I love that she had the guts to get up on stage there and show that in 1939, someone as tattooed as her should also be considered beautiful and feminine. And those are the qualities that she wanted to portray. She also worked in San Francisco as a tattoo artist for many years. But I also want to point out some of the images that these ladies chose. As tattooing technology got better and better, you can see that the quality of the tattoos that these women have totally varied. It's a little hard to tell, but especially if you look kind of at Nora's legs here, the quality of the work isn't super amazing. I mean, they're making do with what they had, which for a lot of these people would have started out with hand poke tattooing and then moved into tattoo machines. But the great thing is these women could choose the images that worked for them and that reflected who they were on the inside, on the outside. So you can see here with Artoria Gibbons, she has a Last Supper design on her back. She has religious imagery on her legs. She has George Washington and flags on her chest. And that reflected who Artoria was. She was a deeply religious woman who also loved art. And I love to see that the tattoos that she has reflects that. You can also see that, of course, patriotic imagery was especially popular with these ladies. Lady Viola has 6 presidents tattooed on her chest, along with flags. She has the U.S. Capitol building on her back. You can see the Statue of Liberty here. I mean, it's just wild what these women chose to get. And of course, here's just some more shots of Betty and some of her kind of feminine clothing choices that she liked to wear. Okay. So speaking of Betty and the fact that she tattooed, you can see here her actual tattooing kit. This tattooing kit was kept by Lyle Tuttle. You can see him standing there with her when she was inducted into the Tattooing Hall of Fame. World Hall of Fame? Hall of Fame in 1981. But it's pretty cool to see the equipment that she actually used. You can see these little jars here, which still had ink in them. There was also still a sponge that had some kind of weird residue on it, so we just didn't really handle that one without gloves on. But you can see here, you know, her tattoo machine as well, with a very rudimentary, it did the job. And so I should probably talk a little bit about how tattooing works. I have to pull this up myself. I am not a tattoo artist myself. I'm definitely more of a history person than a science or technology person. If any tattoo artists are listening right now and I get this wrong, please let us know in the comments. Please correct me. This is not my forte. But like I said, originally all tattoos were done by hand. So the tattoo artist would dip a single needle or a sharpened bone or thorn or another stylus into pigment. And then she or he would poke the stylus into the second layer of skin, forcing the ink about 1 millimeter deep under the skin. So this is sometimes called hand tattooing, stick and poke, hand poke, and this method is still used around the world. But what you can see here with Betty is an electric tattoo machine. Patented in 1891, the machine can punch from 1 to 32 pointed needles into the skin at once, and then tattoo ink is forced in through the open holes. It's kind of amazing. Needles can puncture the skin up to 3,000 times per minute during a tattoo. And so tattoo artists will use the foot pedal that's attached to it to control the machine's electric motor, which in turn controls the speed that the needles move in and out. And they use different types of needles and different numbers of needles depending on what part of the process you're in, how detailed the work is, you know, is it shading, is it an outline, all of that. Super intricate, super cool. And that's one of those things that, you know, I have tattoos, but I don't always think about when I'm getting the tattoo. And if you've never been tattooed before and you're wondering how all those needles going in and out feels, you can just kind of pinch your skin a few times. It hurts the most when you're kind of by bone, but for me, it actually really hurt the most when it was the flabby part near my armpit. Just, you know, fun fact, feel free to put in the chat what your experience was like if you have any tattoos. But of course, we have to talk in this talk about female tattooists. And so I use the word tattooist here because that's how tattoo artists were referred to in the time period that I'm talking about. Some considered themselves artists. A lot of them consider themselves just kind of working class folks making a living. So I'm going to be using the word tattooist here rather than tattoo artist, although that is not to say at all that we should be calling folks who tattoo today tattooists as well. Those people working today are tattoo artists for sure. So this is Maud Stevens Wagner. You may have seen this photograph before. It's a very famous one, although usually we see the black and white version. And she was the first non-Native American woman known to tattoo in the United States. And you can see in this colorized photo, you can see kind of reds and navies, and that gives a good indication of the ink colors available at the time she got tattooed. This photo was taken in 1907. So apparently the story with Maud is that she worked in the circus scene as an aerialist and contortionist. That it was there that she met her husband-to-be, Gus. She would only go on a date with him, though, if he tattooed her all over and taught her how to tattoo. She met him after he had just tattooed 1,900 people at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, including, according to the St. Louis Dispatch, 31 society women. So there you go again with those society women. But this really reflects the way that many women learned how to tattoo in these early days, which was that a boyfriend or a husband had to teach them. They couldn't just walk into a shop or walk up to a tattoo artist and say, hey, teach me to tattoo. Male tattoo artists or tattooists were jealous of their trade. They didn't want anybody to learn and take away business from them. And they especially were not going to deign to teach a female to tattoo. So most of the women we're talking about today got into the game because their husbands or their boyfriends taught them. You can see here a picture of Maud with her husband Gus, as well as their daughter Ladova. Ladova also became a tattoo artist. She started tattooing at the age of 9 and tattooed people like Don Ed Hardy, but she never had tattoos herself. And again, you can see how heavily Maud is tattooed here. With the clothing, you would never know walking around if somebody had tattoos or not. So a lot of other women also worked, mostly in port towns, and that's all along the West Coast and the East Coast as well. These particular women, Madame Austin on the left here, she worked in San Francisco in the early 1900s-ish. Ruth Wayland here, tattooed in San Francisco as well in the 1930s and 40s. These tattoos, all on Ruth's arms, though, were drawn in. I've never been able to find a reason why, but she did not actually have tattoos that looked like that. Those were drawn in with a pen on a photograph years later, and then that photo has been reproduced many times. This is Bobby Libery. She took the photo of Madame Austin here. She worked in sideshows and also managed them. She met her second husband, Andy Libery, there. And she learned to tattoo after 1930 from him and opened her own shop in San Francisco. And I love this quote. She said that she got tattooed because, quote, I knew a living when I saw one. I just think that's great. And then I also wanted to talk about Painless Nell Bowen. She worked in San Diego, and at one point in the 40s, she owned 40s and 50s, she owned 5 tattoo shops. 5 tattoo shops in San Diego with her sister and her husband. She liked to tattoo sailors. It was quick work, not always the cleanest, but it's just amazing that she really monopolized the San Diego tattoo scene during and after World War II. You can also see here some other women that were tattoo artists. We're not going to talk too much about them, but it's just nice to mention that there were a lot of women working as tattoo artists and tattooists, and especially in the off-season from the circus sideshow season. So you can see here, this is Dainty Dottie Jensen, who, of course, worked as a fat lady in the circus, and she did the tattoos, or the flash that you can see up at the left here. Other women that we kind of mentioned that were tattoo artists, Betty Broadbent, we saw her tattoo kit. Lady Viola, who had the Capitol building on her back and the 6 presidents on her chest. Artoria also did some tattooing, though rarely. She was the one with the Last Supper tattoo. And then that kind of brings us into post-World War II era. I chose to end my research around World War II because things changed so much in American society after World War II in general, and it totally changed in the tattooing scene as well. So just to give a brief summary, and please put any questions that you might have in the comments on Facebook or on YouTube. I would love to answer them and also hear from you, so you don't only have to listen to me talk. But post-World War II, there was kind of a decline in popularity in tattoos for women in the 1950s, especially as there was an increase in tattoos being used to kind of signify gang membership or, you know, prison stuff, like kind of the dregs of society, right? Like people started to think about tattoos being associated with them rather than anything positive. And I know that my dad definitely asked when I got my first tattoo, you know, are you a biker or a rebel? Like, and it was like, well, I don't have a bike, so I guess I'm a rebel, which if anyone on this call knows me, they know I'm definitely not. I'm very much a rule follower. But anyway, a decline in the 1950s, but then back in the late 60s and in the 1970s, there was another upswing as public figures started getting tattooed. So you can see here Janis Joplin. She has a tattoo on her wrist. She has a tiny little heart tattoo as well on her chest, tattooed by Lyle Tuttle. And, you know, with the second wave of feminism coming through, women were reclaiming their bodies. They were deciding how they wanted to look and making those choices for themselves. So tattoos became more popular for women again. And then that leaves us up onto today, where, like we said in the beginning, 23% of women and only 19% of men in the whole United States have tattoos. And I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you. I would love to answer questions and chat and hear from you. So Kenny, should I stop sharing my screen?
That is up to you. If you want to keep sharing the screen, we can, or I can take it down and it'll just be the two of us in video.
Yeah, let's take it down.
All right. So as Amy mentioned, if anyone has a question, just go ahead and comment. Whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, you can comment right on that video and it'll come directly to us. At the moment, none have come in yet. But at the beginning, Amy, you mentioned you were going to, I believe, explain one or two of your tattoos.
Yes, and I was just thinking that I always leave it so as folks gear up and think of those questions, we could talk about that. And just as an aside too, even if someone doesn't have a question and they just want to share a story about their own tattoo, it would be really neat to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to just go ahead and share something. We did just have a compliment come in for you. Very informative.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. So I'll share two quick stories about my tattoos. So the first one, where my dad asked if I was a biker or a rebel. My first tattoo I got in Worcester, Ohio, my senior year of college, and it's a Leonard Cohen tattoo. So you might be able to see right here. It's, you know, it's mirrored. I told you, Kenny, I can't do the mirrored. But it's a drawing that Leonard Cohen did on the front of the Book of Longing, which was a book of poetry. My dad has always been a huge Leonard Cohen fan. And, you know, after hating him when I was 12 and thinking he was so slow and boring, I also grew to love him. And so I have to say, I didn't get the tattoo to take the wind out of my dad's sails, but I think it really helped because he didn't know, like, if he should be mad about me getting a Leonard Cohen tattoo. So that was kind of fun. And the other tattoo that I was going to share a little bit about was that in the actual traveling exhibit, there's a mannequin that tours with the show. And so I didn't want folks to walk away from this exhibit only seeing artwork from women who tattooed before World War II and thinking that women just have like a very rudimentary art style, because that's not the case. That's how everyone tattooed back then. And now art styles and the tattoo technology is like crazy different. So I had 6 women in the Bay Area collaborate on a mannequin. And so one shop did one arm, another shop did a different arm, you know, the torso, the hands. It was very cool. And so one of the pieces that was drawn on that mannequin, I couldn't stop thinking about. So I actually got back here. It's kind of hard to see, but it's a little wreath. She had a cuter design in there. I made her change it because it didn't seem to be me. But I ended up getting that tattoo. So every time I see it, I kind of think about that show.
Yeah. Yeah, which if anyone has a tattoo they want to talk about, go ahead and comment on that too. Obviously, we won't be able to see yours. I guess while we're waiting for any questions to come in, I just had one. And so how today, I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, today, most of the people who give tattoos are artists. They're much more detailed and more in depth. I'm guessing the equipment's probably more expensive as well, but
I'm sure.
a lot of tattoos are quite expensive. But I don't know if you came across this in your research. How does that compare to tattoos, in the past? Because tattooists were not as common, I'm guessing. Were they more expensive or cheaper?
They were cheaper. I would need to kind of do the currency conversion to see what it, came out to then. But I do actually have that for Lady Viola. I have that stat for her. So in 1930, it would have cost $485 for all her tattoos. And she was the one with the 6 presidents and the US Capitol building. And so today, that would be about $7,000. And then for context, just like one of my arms is already over $1,000. So I think this right arm, I think, is like $1,500. So I can't imagine how much it would cost to get like a full body tattoo.
Yeah. Okay, we got a couple questions coming in. The first one great. I can answer much quicker. Am I in that 19%? No, I do not have any tattoos. No interest myself, maybe because I'm a baby and don't want the pain. Also, I can't even commit to a favorite ice cream flavor, so committing to something permanent on my body does not entice me at all. But a question for Amy, or maybe just a comment here. Debbie says, when I went for my first tattoo, the artist asked where I wanted it. I said where it would hurt the least. He said, honey, it's going to hurt, so get it where you want it.
I love that. I totally love that. I was a total baby and, did hear for my first tattoo. I was like, that can't hurt that much. And, it still hurt a little bit, but, Debbie, I love that you had that experience.
If anyone else has a question or comment, go ahead and submit that in.
I think I may see a question from Ryan LeBlanc.
Oh, I did miss that. So good guy.
Thank you. I always have an eye out for Ryan LeBlanc's name, who also went to college with us. Hi, Ryan.
So Ryan asked, most of the old tattoos appeared to have no more than 3 colors. Is there a reason for this?
Yeah, there is a reason for this. You could get poisoned by using some other colors because they hadn't figured out how to do it safely yet. So most early tattoo designs use kind of heavy black ink and then dark red and navy blue, and those were the only available colors. I can't remember what made it poisonous, but I know that yellow definitely infected people. Like whatever metal or whatever plant they were using to create yellow ink ended up poisoning people. So it took a while to figure out how to use metal salts and, suspend that in some sort of like carrier solution in a way that's safe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I know it's not even necessarily tattooing, but one of the famous stories from The Wizard of Oz is the original Tin Man had skin poisoning because the silver paint they used leached too much metal into his skin and his blood. So I'm certainly injecting it into you is going to be a bigger issue.
Mm-hmm. And nowadays, too, they actually have many different kinds of tattooing. So they even have vegan tattooing, which is really neat. So if you're thinking that you want to get a tattoo and, you want to make sure that your ink is vegan, you can ask for a tattoo artist who uses that style of ink.
Well, I believe that's all the questions at the moment. If you have anything else you want to talk about, we can wait, see if someone else has one, or if that's all you have.
I think folks have heard me talk for 45 minutes, so I might let them off the hook.
Oh, wait, we just got one more coming in. So how do you decide a tattoo when there are so many choices?
Oh, that is a great question. That's a great question. I have been really lucky in that I found a tattoo artist out here in San Francisco whose style I really like. And so I basically am not artistic at all. And I just went into her with an idea and I said, hey, I kind of want these 3 flowers. And she said, okay, great. Come back in 3 weeks and I'll show you the design. And I came back in and I was so nervous, because I was like, what if I don't like it? Do I say no? Do I ask her to start over? Like, that seems so rude. And then I walked in and I was like, that is exactly what I was picturing, but could never have, said it out loud. I could never have like gotten it across. And so that's this one here. This is my first big one. So it's state flowers. You may recognize Ohio's state flowers in here. But yeah, it's a really good question. I'm lucky that I still like all of my tattoos. I know some people don't. But yeah, it's been especially fun having them designed especially for me, which most tattoo artists love to do. So that's been helpful in helping me make a choice because they make the choice.
That brings up a good point for people who haven't had tattoos and are considering it. What is normally the process? So let's say you have an idea. Do you normally take it in and they draw it out and you get it that day, or is it more drawn out and you have to go back and...
That's a great question. And I think it probably depends on the size of the tattoo and the tattoo artist that you're working with. So for example, this one here, I mean, we already knew what that design was. So I went in and I said, Carolyn, I would like this. And she said, okay, great, go. And then the other ones, I've usually come in with an idea. We set an appointment time to talk about the idea. I come back a few weeks later, they show it to me or they email it to me ahead of time and then tattoo me. Other tattoo artists are so, if it's just like you pick out the flash that you want on the wall, a pre-made design, they just stick it on you right then and there.
All right. Well, we actually had a few more questions come in. So Ryan wanted to know if tattoos have ever been outlawed.
Oh, that's a good question, Ryan. I want to say no, they were never specifically outlawed. Like by a state legislative body or like nationally. But I'm sure that in some towns, I mean, they were demonized. I will tell one quick story about Buffalo, New York. The lesbian community in the 1950s and 1960s got these blue star tattoos on their wrist and they would just put their watch over it. So tattoos weren't outlawed in that town, but the police definitely looked to see if they had those tattoos.
Huh. We have another story here. So Dee says, when I was in my 50s, I was in my 50s when I got my first tattoo, and it was a fancy dragonfly with the word create amongst curlicues. I was celebrating change and new commitment to creativity and got my tattoo in Lownville, and she loves it.
Yes, I love that. Oh, that's so great. I've been trying to get my mom to get a tattoo. She says she wants one, but we just haven't made the appointment yet. Maybe after COVID and pandemic stuff is done, she'll celebrate that kind of change.
Someone else wants to know, how do they erase tattoos? Or at least how much can you?
I've heard of lasers being used. I am lucky I've never had to look too much into the process myself, since, like I said, I do still like my tattoos. But I've had a few friends who've had tattoos lasered off either because of taste changing or because it was associated with a part of their life they didn't want to be associated with anymore. And I know that it hurt a lot more than getting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it takes a while. You have to go back multiple times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you got to wait for the blistering to go down in between each session. Like it seems like no joke. So
yeah.
Good luck if anyone out here is thinking about that.
I think there's also some creams that kind of speed up the skin rejuvenation, but I don't think they work completely. They just help fade the ink more than erase it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is our last question. So thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and especially thank you to Amy for the wonderful presentation.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much to everyone for taking the time to listen. Thanks, Kenny, for hosting me, and thanks to the museum. This was great.
Yep, thank you. And for everyone else, we are hoping to return with our speaker series in the fall back to in-person instead of virtual, but who knows? We'll see where we're at that point. So stay tuned, and hopefully we can welcome you back to the museum soon. Thank you and good night.